Doubt began as a faint scratch, a foreign perfume on my husband's neck. Soon that whisper of unease ripped through our storybook life, revealing a truth far darker than I could have imagined. The first time the doubt crept in, it was as quiet as a mouse in the wall. You don't notice it at first, but then you start hearing the scratching, faint and intermittent, and you can't unhear it. For me, the scratching started with the scent of perfume, not my perfume. Mine is a light, citrusy scent Mark always said he loved. This was different. He came home one Tuesday later than usual, smelling of lavender and something muskier, deeper. When I hugged him, my nose buried in his neck, the scent was so foreign it was like hugging a stranger. I pulled back and asked, "What's that smell?" He just laughed it off, a deep, easy laugh that used to make my stomach flutter. "Must be Sarah from marketing," he said. "She practically bathes in the stuff. We were all crammed into the conference room for hours." And that was that, a plausible explanation, a name. Sarah. The mouse went quiet again. Mark and I had what our friends called a storybook relationship. We met in college, dated for 5 years, and had been married for 3. We just bought a beautiful little house with a blue front door and a garden. I was determined not to kill. Our life was a comfortable rhythm of morning coffees, shared commutes, weeknight dinners watching our favorite shows, and lazy weekends spent doing DIY projects or hiking with our dog, Buster. Mark was my rock, my best friend. He was thoughtful, funny, and his ambition was one of the things I loved most about him. So when he started working late more often, I tried to be the supportive wife. "This big project at work," he'd say, running a hand through his already messy hair. "It's a monster. But if I land this, it means a promotion. It means that trip to Italy we've been dreaming of." How could I argue with that? I wanted that trip to Italy. I wanted his success. So I made him late dinners and kept them warm in the oven. I'd wait up for him, my book falling onto my chest as I dozed off on the sofa, only to be woken by the sound of his key in the lock. But the late nights became more frequent, 3, then 4 times a week. The texts he sent became shorter, more generic. "Still at it, don't wait up. Gonna be a late one." The details vanished. He used to tell me funny stories about his coworkers or complain about the terrible coffee in the break room. Now his work life was a black box. The scratching in the walls was getting louder. One evening I decided to surprise him. I packed up a thermos of his favorite soup and some sandwiches and drove to his office building downtown. I pictured his face lighting up, the gratitude in his eyes. It was a little after 9 p.m. I pulled into the visitor parking lot, a smile already on my face. But as I scanned the massive glass-fronted building, I noticed the section where his department was located was completely dark. Every single window. I circled the parking garage, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I knew exactly where he parked his silver sedan every day, on the 3rd level, near the elevator. I drove up the ramp, my headlights cutting through the gloom. The spot was empty. His car wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere in the entire garage. My first thought was that I'd misunderstood. Maybe they'd moved to a different site for the project. I called him. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hey, babe," I said, trying to keep my voice light, casual. "Just thought I'd drop by with some dinner, but it looks like you guys aren't at the office. Did you move to a different location for the project? Just call me back when you get a chance. Love you." I drove home in a daze, the container of soup growing cold on the passenger seat. He called me back 20 minutes later. "Hey, so sorry, my phone was on silent," he said, his voice sounding slightly out of breath. "Yeah, we had to go over to the print house across town to check the final proofs. Total last-minute emergency. I'm so sorry you drove all that way. That was so sweet of you." It all sounded so reasonable. But the lie about his phone being on silent when I know for a fact he never silences it, and the perfectly packaged excuse, the scratching was a full-on gnawing now. That's when I remembered Sarah from marketing, the one who bathes in lavender perfume. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I felt like I was losing my mind, caught between my gut instinct and the man I trusted with my life. I went on to his social media, found his colleague list, and there she was, Sarah Miller. Her profile was public. There were pictures of her with her cat, pictures from a recent beach vacation, and pictures of her new apartment she'd just moved into a few months ago. In one of the photos, she was holding up her new keys, and in the caption, she'd tagged the apartment complex. It was only 15 minutes from our house. The next time he said he was working late, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I waited until 10 p.m., my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I typed the address of Sarah's apartment complex into my GPS. Every red light felt like an eternity, my own mind screaming at me to turn back, to trust my husband, to not be this person. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pulled onto her quiet, tree-lined street and killed my headlights, parking half a block away. And then I saw it. Parked directly in front of her building under the amber glow of a streetlight was a familiar silver sedan. My stomach dropped to the floor. I could see the small dent on the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a post last winter. I could see the university alumni sticker in the corner of the back window that I'd bought him as a joke. It was his car. There was no doubt. The mouse wasn't in the wall anymore. It was staring me right in the face. I lifted my phone, my thumb hovering over the camera icon. The screen's light illuminated the tears, silently streaming down my face. I took a picture, then another, and another. I took a picture of his car, of the building's entrance, a close-up of his license plate, all time-stamped. He came home around midnight, humming a cheerful tune as he walked through the door. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the entrance and came over to kiss me on the forehead as I sat rigidly on the sofa. "Long night," he sighed, loosening his tie. "But I think we finally cracked it. The client is going to love it." I just looked at him, my face a blank mask. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "are you having an affair?" He actually recoiled, a look of genuine shock and hurt on his face. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. They were so warm. "Honey, what? No, of course not. Where is this coming from? Is it the late nights? I told you this project is just killing me. Baby, you're imagining things. You're exhausted. You're stressed. You're letting your imagination run wild." He said it with such sincerity, such gentle concern, that for a split second, I almost believed him. I almost thought I'd completely lost my mind. He saw the flicker of doubt in my eyes and pressed on. "I love you. Only you. Please, you have to believe me." I pulled my hands away and just smiled, a cold, dead smile that didn't reach my eyes. I leaned forward and picked up the stack of glossy prints I'd had made at the 24-hour pharmacy, which were lying face down on the coffee table. I slowly turned the top photograph over and slid it across the polished wood of the coffee table. The image was stark under the lamplight. His silver sedan, unmistakable, parked on a street I knew he'd never been on before. His face, which had been a canvas of loving concern, froze. The blood seemed to drain from it, leaving his skin pale and waxy. He stared at the picture as if it were a venomous snake. I didn't say a word. I just slid the next one over. A closer shot showing the dent on the bumper crystal clear, and then the next. The entrance to her apartment building with his car perfectly framed in the foreground. "Okay," he said, his voice a strained whisper. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He was scrambling. I could see the gears turning in his head, searching for a gear that would get him out of this. "Okay, look, it's not what you think. I swear to God, it is not what you think." He stood up and started pacing, running both hands through his hair. "Sarah, she's been having a really hard time. A really, really hard time. Her ex-boyfriend, the guy she broke up with before she moved, he's been harassing her, showing up at her work, calling her nonstop. Last night, he was parked outside her apartment, just sitting in his car, watching her place. She called me in a panic. She didn't know what to do. She was terrified. I was the only person from work she felt she could call. He stopped pacing and knelt in front of me again, his face a mask of earnestness. All I did was go over there to make sure she was okay. I sat with her until he finally left. I made her some tea. That's it, honey. I was just being a friend. A good friend. I didn't tell you because I knew you would worry, and I knew how it would look. I was going to tell you tonight. I was just trying to figure out how. The story was good. I had to give him that. It was detailed. It was emotional. It painted him as a hero. The old me, the me from a week ago, would have melted. I would have felt ashamed of my suspicion and wrapped my arms around my noble, caring husband. But the old me was gone, burned away by the stench of lavender and lies. Her ex, I repeated, my voice flat. So you sat with her for over 3 hours in her apartment, and you didn't answer my call because your phone was on silent, even though you were waiting for a potentially dangerous ex-boyfriend to leave? His eyes flickered, a tiny, almost imperceptible sign of panic. I was focused on her, making sure she was calm. I must have just not heard it. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. And the perfume, Mark? Did she spill some on you while you were heroically protecting her? His jaw tightened. I told you, she wears a lot of it. I gave her a hug when I left. She was crying. Is that a crime now? Am I not allowed to comfort a friend? He was getting angry now. The pleading was gone, replaced by indignation. He stood up again, towering over me. I can't believe this. I cannot believe you followed me. You took pictures? Like some private investigator? What is wrong with you? All these years, everything we have, and you trust me so little that you sneak around and spy on me? He threw his hands up in the air. You're the one who's been acting weird for weeks, distant, quiet, and now I see why. You've been in your head making up these insane stories, convincing yourself that I'm some kind of monster. He was shouting now. The beautiful, calm rhythm of our home was shattered into a million pieces. Our dog, Buster, who had been sleeping in his bed in the corner, whined and put his head under his paws. Part of me wanted to scream back, to throw the rest of the photos at him, to match his rage with my own hurricane of pain. But I didn't. I just sat there, a strange, chilling calm washing over me. I let him finish his tirade, let him pace and fume and paint me as the crazy, paranoid wife. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment after his voice trailed off. He was breathing heavily, staring at me, waiting for me to break, to cry, to apologize. I did none of those things. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. You're right, I said softly, and I saw a flash of triumph in his eyes. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken me down. You're right, Mark. Spying on you at her apartment was wrong. It was a violation of your privacy and hers. I shouldn't have done it. He visibly relaxed, a small sigh escaping his lips. He started to move toward me, his hands outstretched, ready to offer the forgiveness I didn't want. I held up a hand to stop him. So I didn't do it again. I paused, letting the words sink in. Instead, I did something much simpler. This afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I decided to surprise you with your favorite coffee. I drove to your office, but I couldn't find a parking spot anywhere near the entrance, so I just went down into the garage, to your reserved spot, the one with your name on it. And it's funny, because someone else was parked right there beside you, in the spot that's supposed to be for Mr. Davies, the executive visiting from the London office this week. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Can you guess whose car it was, Mark? The color drained from his face for a second time. If the first set of photos had been a punch to the gut, this revelation was a dagger to the heart, and he was staggering from the blow. His mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air. The righteous anger, the indignant performance, all of it evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a raw, desperate panic. He looked cornered. He looked pathetic. Her car? He stammered, shaking his head. No, you're mistaken. That wasn't her car. There are a lot of cars that look like hers. It was a weak defense, and we both knew it. Her car was a distinctive, bright yellow hatchback. She even called it the Bumblebee on her social media. It was as subtle as a foghorn. And Mr. Davies, his trip it was a last-minute change. They moved it up. You must have spoken to the wrong person in HR. Oh, I don't think so, I said, my voice still unnervingly quiet. I felt like I was watching this scene from outside my own body. I spoke to Linda, the head of the department. We had a lovely chat. She mentioned how excited everyone was for his visit next month. She even remembered you asking her about his schedule yesterday morning, which is funny, isn't it? It's almost like you were checking to make sure your alibi was solid before you gave Sarah his parking spot. Every word was a stone, and I was building a wall between us he could never climb. He stared at me, his eyes now filled with a different emotion. The panic was morphing back into anger, but this time it was a more venomous, desperate kind. This was the rage of a trapped animal. So what? He finally exploded, his voice cracking. Okay, fine, she parked in the spot. The visitor lot was full, and I let her use it for a few hours while she was in a meeting in our building. It's a parking spot. You've completely lost your mind. You're calling my office, you're snooping, you're tracking my every move. You are trying to destroy us with this paranoia. Am I, Mark? I asked, leaning back against the sofa cushions. I finally felt something other than cold calm, a deep, profound sadness. This man, this stranger shouting in my living room, was the person I had promised to love and cherish. I had built my entire life around him, and he was dismantling it, lie by lie. I'm not the one destroying us. The lies are. The sneaking around is. The smell of another woman's perfume on your clothes is. The fact that you can stand there, look me in the eye after I've caught you in 2 blatant lies, and try to convince me that I'm the crazy one. That's what's destroying us. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, where a neat little file folder was tucked behind a row of photo albums. The photo albums felt like a cruel joke now, a collection of happy moments that were all tainted. I pulled out the folder and returned to the coffee table, placing it next to the photos of his car. He eyed it with suspicion, a new wave of fear washing over his features. "What is that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a funny thing, Mark," I said, opening the folder. "When a person starts lying about big things, you start to wonder about the little things. You start to double-check. So when our joint credit card bill came in the mail today, addressed to me, I decided to open it. I don't normally. That's your job, right? You handle the finances. You always have." I pulled out the stapled pages of the statement and spread them out on the table. "And you do a great job. Everything is always paid on time. But you seem to have overlooked a few charges this month, or maybe you were just hoping I would." His eyes were glued to the papers, wide with horror. He knew what was on them. He knew his entire house of cards was about to come crashing down. "Don't," he breathed, taking a half step toward me. "Please, just stop." But I couldn't stop. I had to see it through. I had to know the full truth, no matter how ugly it was. I ran my finger down the list of charges, past the grocery bills and the gas fill-ups. I stopped at a charge from 2 weeks ago. $150 at La Belle Vie, I read aloud. That's that new French place downtown, the one I said I wanted to try for my birthday. Did you go there with Sarah to make her some tea as well? My finger moved down the page. And what about this? Blossom and Vine Jewelers. $500. That's funny. I don't remember receiving any jewelry lately. He was pale, speechless, shaking his head slowly back and forth, as if he could physically deny the reality printed in black and white in front of him. I felt a tear finally escape my eye and trace a hot path down my cheek. I wasn't cold and calm anymore. I was breaking. But I had one last stone to lay. I pointed to a charge from last Saturday. It was the biggest one on the page. But this one This one is my favorite, Mark. My voice shook with a rage I could no longer contain. A charge for $800 at the Lakeside Inn. Remember that place? The cozy little bed and breakfast by the lake we saw in that travel magazine? The one we promised we'd save for our 5th anniversary? I finally looked up from the paper and met his terrified gaze. I was confused. I knew we hadn't gone, so I called them. Mark, I called the inn this afternoon. They were very helpful. They said they had a wonderful stay. The reservation was for 2 nights in the honeymoon suite. I took a shaky breath, preparing for the final devastating blow. They said the booking was made under the name Miller, for a Mr. and Mrs. Miller. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more suffocating than his shouting had been. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, utterly defeated, the last of his lies stripped away, leaving him exposed and pathetic. The credit card statement lay on the table between us like a verdict. Mr. and Mrs. Miller. He had not only cheated on me, he had replaced me. He had taken our future, our special plans, our anniversary spot, and given it to her. He had even given her my name, in a way. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were filled with tears. Not the performative pleading tears from before, but real gut-wrenching tears of shame and regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I am so sorry." The apology felt like a tiny bandage on a gaping wound. It was meaningless. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand reaching for me, but I flinched back as if he were on fire. The gesture stopped him cold. The look on my face must have told him everything he needed to know. "Get out," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just get out." He started to speak, to offer excuses or pleas, but I cut him off. "No, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear her name. I don't want to hear your reasons. I just want you to pack a bag and leave my house." I emphasized the word my. It was our house, but in that moment he felt like a trespasser, a hostile intruder in the sanctuary we had built. He stared at me for a long moment, his face crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked slowly up the stairs. I sank back onto the sofa, the adrenaline that had been coursing through me draining away, leaving me weak and hollow. I heard the muffled sounds of him opening and closing drawers, the scrape of a suitcase being pulled from the closet. Each sound was a stab to my heart. 20 minutes later, he came back down carrying a duffel bag and his briefcase. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me, his face ravaged by guilt. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It started as a friendship and it got out of control. I was going to end it, I swear I was." I just shook my head, unable to look at him. Every word felt like another lie, another manipulation. "Please," he begged, "don't let this be the end. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can do anything." I finally looked up at him, my eyes burning. "The time for fixing this was before you booked a honeymoon suite with another woman, Mark. Now all you can do is leave." He lingered for a moment longer, hoping I would change my mind. When it was clear I wouldn't, he walked to the front door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He opened the door and a gust of cold night air swept into the house. He turned back one last time. "I love you," he whispered. Then he was gone, the blue door clicking shut behind him, sealing the end of our life together. I sat there in the deafening silence, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage. The photos, the credit card statement, the ghosts of his lies all swirling around me. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in a state of shock, a numb, empty void where my future used to be. Buster came over and rested his head on my lap, whining softly as if he could sense my heartbreak. I stroked his fur, my movements mechanical. The life I had known was over. The next few days were a blur. I called my sister, and her fury on my behalf was a strange comfort. I told my parents, who immediately offered to fly out. I moved through my days like a ghost, going to work, walking the dog, eating food that tasted like ash. The hardest part was coming home to a house that was half empty. His clothes were gone from the closet. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. His side of the bed was cold and empty. Every corner held a memory, a phantom of the life we'd shared. He tried to call, but I didn't answer. He sent long, rambling texts full of apologies and promises, which I deleted without reading past the first few words. I knew I needed to see a lawyer. I knew I had to start untangling our lives, but the sheer emotional and logistical weight of it all was paralyzing. One evening, about a week after he left, I was sorting through a stack of mail, most of which I'd let pile up on the counter. Bills, junk mail, a magazine. At the bottom of the pile was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't addressed in the usual printed font of a bill. The address was handwritten in a neat, feminine script. There was no return address. My curiosity piqued. I slid it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of matching stationery. As I unfolded it, my blood ran cold. It was a letter, and I recognized the handwriting instantly from a birthday card I'd seen on Sarah's desk once when I dropped off lunch for Mark. The letter began without a salutation. "I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but you don't know the whole story. You think he chose me over you, but that's not what happened. There's something you need to know about Mark, something he's been hiding from both of us." My hand trembled as I held the letter. Every instinct screamed at me to tear it up, to burn it, to not let this woman's poison seep any further into my life. What could she possibly say that would matter? She was the other woman, a homewrecker trying to salvage her own conscience, or worse, twist the knife. But the last line, "something he's been hiding from both of us." The words snagged in my mind. Against my better judgment, I kept reading. "Mark didn't tell me he was married," the letter continued. "Not at first. He told me he was recently divorced, that it had been a painful and bitter separation, and that he was living alone. He painted a picture of you as a controlling, unstable person he was lucky to have escaped. I know now that was all a lie. He showed me photos of your house, but he told me it was his childhood home that he was renovating to sell. He was building a completely separate life, a fantasy, with me. The trip to the Lakeside Inn, that was supposed to be our 1-year anniversary. He told me he had met me a year ago on the day his divorce was finalized." I had to sit down. My legs felt weak. A 1-year anniversary? The affair hadn't been a recent mistake, a fling that had gotten out of control. It had been a calculated, long-term deception. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was living a double life. Sarah went on to explain that she had started getting suspicious when he could never spend a full weekend with her, always had an excuse for why she couldn't come to his house, and was secretive with his phone. The final straw for her was when she'd found a recent receipt in his coat pocket from a local nursery. It was for a Japanese maple, the very tree I had excitedly pointed out to him that we should get for our garden. She confronted him, and the entire web of lies unraveled. The letter ended with a simple, chilling paragraph. He didn't choose me. He never would have. He was just using me as an escape. The thing he's been hiding isn't just me. It's that he's a compulsive liar about everything. He told me his father was a war hero. I know from work colleagues his dad is an accountant in Ohio. He told me he graduated with honors. I know he barely passed. His whole life is a performance. I am so sorry for the pain I've caused you. I was a fool, and I believed him. I thought you should know the kind of man you're really dealing with." The letter didn't absolve her of her role, but it did something far more profound. It set me free. My grief, which had been tangled up with feelings of inadequacy and questions of, what did she have that I don't, was suddenly clarified. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about her. It was about Mark and the deep pathological brokenness inside him. He hadn't fallen out of love with me. He was incapable of the kind of honest, real love our marriage was supposed to be built on. He preferred the thrill of fantasy, of constructing a world where he could be the hero of his own story, even if it was all a lie. That letter became my armor. I hired the most ruthless divorce attorney I could find. When Mark was served with the papers, he tried to fight it, of course. He called me, crying, begging, promising he would get help, that he would change. But the man on the phone wasn't my husband anymore. He was a character in a play, and I was no longer willing to be his audience. I instructed my lawyer to handle all communication. During the discovery process, the true extent of his financial deception came to light. The secret credit card statement was just the tip of the iceberg. He had taken out a personal loan, supposedly for home renovations, that had been funneled into his second life with Sarah. He had lied on our mortgage application. His entire identity was a house of cards built on sand. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender. Faced with evidence of financial fraud on top of the infidelity, he agreed to all of my terms. I got the house, our beautiful little house with the blue front door, which was now solely my house. I got more than half of our joint assets to compensate for the money he had secretly spent, and I got my freedom. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound sense of relief, like I had just woken up from a long and terrifying nightmare. I took the Japanese maple tree he had bought, the one that had exposed his lies to Sarah, and I planted it in the front yard. It felt symbolic. Something that had been part of his deception was now going to grow into something beautiful on my terms. My sister came over that evening with a bottle of champagne. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. We toasted to new beginnings. "You know," she said, looking at the newly planted tree, "I never liked him. I always thought there was something off about him. Too slick, too perfect." I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in months. "You're imagining things," I said, and we both burst into laughter, the sound echoing into the clear, quiet evening. The house was no longer filled with the sound of scratching mice in the walls, only the sound of my own healing, my own strength, my own peaceful, honest silence.